The Dominion of the Seven Stars did not negotiate with species that used heat radiators. To Sovereign Executioner Vael, standing on the central command deck of the heavy dreadnought Vanguard Prime, the tiny fleet floating in the shadow of the gas giant wasn't an ambassadorial delegation. It was an insult. 2 ships. That was all the Sol Systems Alliance had sent to finalize the terms of the Frontier Boundary Treaty. The first was the UNS Concord, a sleek, unarmored diplomatic shuttle painted in non-reflective white composite. The second was an escort ship so small and stripped of hull paint that it resembled a piece of discarded orbital debris drifting through the void. Vael's tactical officer brought up the scan telemetry, projecting the structural schematics of the human vessels across the bridge. 0 high-yield plasma cannons. 0 localized tachyon shields. No magnetic containment fields. To the Dominion, a vessel without energy shielding wasn't a warship. It was a floating tomb waiting for an ignition source. Vael smoothed his command sash, his 6 eyes tracking the slow, chemical thruster burns of the human escort. The Alliance had spent 6 months requesting this summit, broadcasting messages of peace, economic cooperation, and mutual border respect. But the Empire did not share borders with primitives. The Empire expanded, and those who could not defend their territory were simply absorbed into the machinery of state service. The human diplomatic vessel signaled for final docking coordinates. They were following protocol. They were acting as if the standard laws of galactic diplomacy protected them. They were dead wrong. Vael raised his right hand, signaling the fire control deck. Across the Imperial fleet, 3 heavy cruisers and the Vanguard Prime locked their forward lance arrays onto the human shuttle. A low-frequency hum vibrated through the hull plates as enough focused plasma to boil an ocean pooled in the dreadnought's primary barrels. On the bridge's communication console, a low-bandwidth radio signal began to pulse from the human escort ship. It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It was an automated, monophonic audio loop repeating a single sentence in 6,000 galactic dialects, over and over, with cold, metronomic precision. Warning. You are currently aiming weapons systems at an active diplomatic delegation. Automated strategic directives are now armed. Disengage immediately. Vael smiled, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth, and ignored the broadcast. Superior Force did not listen to the final warnings of cattle. He brought his hand down. Fire. The lance fire hit the UNS Concord with the blinding brilliance of a dying star. 4 synchronized streams of hyperheated plasma tore across the vacuum, converging directly on the center mass of the human diplomatic shuttle. On the bridge of the Vanguard Prime, sensor officers leaned back, waiting for the inevitable thermal bloom and the expansion ring of vaporized titanium. Instead, there was nothing. No explosive pulse. No scatter of molten debris. No spike in ambient radiation. When the glare cleared from the optics, the UNS Concord was still there. Its sleek, non-reflective hull hadn't melted or cracked. Instead, the white composite coating had turned a flat, absolute matte black, as if the ship itself had swallowed the energy whole and buried it deep within its structure. The chemical thrusters were dead. The external navigation lights were dark. Every system on both the shuttle and its stripped-down escort had cut out in the exact same millisecond. On the Imperial bridge, the sensor officer tapped frantically at his console, resetting the telemetry sweep, assuming a primary optics failure. But the secondary and tertiary arrays confirmed the exact same impossible reality. The human ships were intact, yet completely void of energy. No heat, no radiation, no magnetic signature. They hung in the shadow of the gas giant like twin obsidian tombs. Sovereign Vael narrowed his eyes, stepping forward toward the main viewport. A standard civilian hull should have been reduced to atomic dust by a fraction of that firepower. Energy weapons relied on superheating matter until atomic bonds sheared apart, but the human vessel hadn't even radiated heat back into the vacuum. It was as if the strike had been routed into a zero-point sink. Then the silence broke. The monophonic warning loop that had been broadcasting on repeat snapped off. In its place, a new signal flooded every radio, quantum, and subspace band across the Imperial fleet. It wasn't a broadcast from the human shuttle's transmitter. It was an override, bleeding directly through the Vanguard Prime's internal comm speakers, bypassing firewalls and encryption protocols as if they weren't even there. The voice was synthetic, stripped of emotion, cadence, or panic. Cold. Calculating. Unyielding. Hostile action confirmed against a Class A diplomatic convoy. Aggressor identity matched. Dominion Vanguard Fleet, Heavy Division 1. Hostilities initiated without provocation. A pause hung in the static, long enough for Vael's tactical officer to look up in sudden, creeping dread. De-escalation protocols terminated. All treaty restrictions scrubbed. Strategic Defense Contingency, Directive Double-Zero is now active. The synthetic voice on the bridge console didn't raise its pitch. It didn't offer a warning or demand a surrender. It simply began to read telemetry data. Target identified, flagship Vanguard Prime. Class 7 Dreadnought. Primary power core operating at 94% capacity. Primary thermal bypass manifold exhibiting a 3% efficiency decay in ventral sector 4. Vael's eyes locked on his tactical officer, whose face had drained of color. That thermal decay was a classified internal maintenance report generated less than 2 hours ago. It hadn't been transmitted off the flagship. It wasn't on any external network. Cruiser Dominance 3, the voice continued without pausing for breath. Secondary plasma banks underpressurized by 12 bars. Hull stress fracture present along port forward bulkhead, length 4.2 meters. Thermal shielding compromised. The voice moved down the line ship by ship, weapon by weapon, reading out structural flaws, ammunition counts, reactor yields, and shield harmonic frequencies with absolute, terrifying precision. It wasn't scanning them now. It couldn't be. The scan data was too deep, too comprehensive, too detailed to have been gathered in seconds. Humanity hadn't spent 6 months trying to arrange a peace summit. They had spent 6 months letting the Imperial fleet passively sit in system, soaking up every stray signal, every thermal bleed, every structural resonance, mapping every weakness down to the millimeter. The diplomatic mission wasn't an olive branch. It was a targeting sweep. All fleet units opened fire. Vael roared, his composure shattering. Vaporize both targets. Burn them to cinders. Targeting locks flared across the Imperial fleet, but before a single weapon could discharge, the stripped-down human escort ship shuddered. Cold gas jets vented along its spine. Explosive bolts detonated in silent, rhythmic bursts, throwing off the vessel's rusted outer armor plates like a shedding skin. Vael leaned forward, expecting to see hidden railgun batteries or high-yield torpedoes beneath the armor. Instead, the core of the escort ship was hollow. Packed tightly within its bare structural frame were thousands of solid, matte gray canisters, dumped into the vacuum of space in a wide, sweeping spray. They didn't ignite. They didn't emit power signatures. They simply drifted out into the void, surrounding the Imperial fleet like a shroud of frozen iron. Clear the field. Vael ordered, his voice echoing across the bridge. Point defense batteries, sweep those objects out of our vector. Before the automated turrets could tracking lock the canisters, a low, subsonic vibration began to hum through the deck plates of every Imperial warship in the system. It wasn't a sound carried through air. It was a spatial tremor, a rapid stuttering of local gravity that rattled teeth inside skulls and set flight instruments spinning wildly. The gray canisters hadn't detonated. They had anchored. Miniaturized, hyperdense gravimetric coils inside each unit snapped open, driving localized gravitational spikes directly into the fabric of local subspace. To the naked eye, nothing changed. The void remained black and empty. But on the tactical grid, the star system suddenly warped, turning into a churned ocean of spatial turbulence. Alarm klaxons shrieked in pitch-perfect unison across every vessel in Vanguard Division 1. On the Vanguard Prime, the drive officer screamed over the sirens. Sovereign. Primary warp containment is back-pressuring. Spatial geometry has gone critical. Our jump cores are overloading. Dump the power. Vael demanded, clutching the edge of the command console. Initiate an emergency subspace transition. Get us out of this well. We can't. The local fabric is pinned. The humans have locked the entire sector's spatial metrics. If we spool the drive now, the warp field will shear the ship in half. One by one, the drive signatures of the Imperial fleet went dark. Their escape routes had been snapped like dry twigs. The Dominion's premier strike force, built to project unstoppable Imperial power across entire sectors, was suddenly tethered in place, stripped of its mobility, and trapped in an orbital cage. Destroy them. Vael spat, pointing a trembling hand toward the floating swarm. Target every single canister with point defense plasma. Clear our space. Targeting sensors locked onto the nearest gray cylinder. High-frequency pulse lasers and heavy kinetic turrets spat fire across the gap, scoring direct hits on a cluster of 3 canisters. The plasma hit the target's dead center. The intense heat bloomed, flashed, and vanished. When the glare cleared, the canisters were still there, drifting along their original vectors without a scratch. They weren't high-tech electronics or delicate sensor arrays. They were solid, cold-worked tungsten carbide blocks wrapped around a single hardened core, engineered to absorb gigawatts of thermal energy without deforming. You couldn't blow them up. You couldn't melt them down. You could only watch as they kept spinning, holding the Empire in a vice of pure, unyielding metal. On the bridge of the Vanguard Prime, the tactical console offered no answers, only redshifted warnings. The gravimetric grid was absolute. The Imperial fleet was pinned like insects to a specimen board. Vael turned his gaze back to the human escort ship. With its outer armor shed and its grav anchors deployed, the vessel was reduced to a naked skeleton of titanium girders and exposed conduits. It had no heavy weapons mounts. It had no missile tubes. By all Imperial standards of ship design, it was useless, a hollow shell holding an engine. Then, deep within its exposed core, a single transceiver pulsed. A tight-beam high-frequency laser array flared from the top of the Escort's superstructure. It didn't point at the Imperial fleet. It pointed out into the dark, silent expanse of the system's outer asteroid belt. Is it a distress call? Vael snapped, grabbing his sensor officer's shoulder. Intercept it. Jam those frequencies. It's not a distress call, Sovereign, the officer whispered, his fingers trembling over the controls. It's not broad spectrum. It's a targeted handshake protocol. That ship isn't a warship. It's a battle management array. A command and control node. Vael felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. A ship whose sole purpose was to process battlefield data, run fire control calculations, and relay targeting vectors to assets located elsewhere in the system. Where is the signal going? Vael demanded. The tactical display shifted, zooming out past the gas giant to the dense, jagged ring of iron and ice orbiting 600,000 kilometers away. For 6 months, Imperial long-range reconnaissance had logged that ring as barren, cataloging hundreds of defunct human survey buoys, automated cargo barges, and discarded construction rigs left behind by human commercial outfits. Suddenly, the sensor display ignited with hundreds of low-energy heat signatures. They weren't new arrivals. They had been sitting there all along, running on microwatt cold fusion batteries, masked as space debris and orbital garbage. One by one, thermal blankets were jettisoned into the void. Massive, industrial-grade magnetic coils, built straight into the spines of converted freighters, spooled up, aligning themselves toward the system's center. The humans hadn't brought a fleet to the peace summit. They had turned the entire star system into a dormant kill box before the first document was ever drafted. And now, every barrel in the belt was locked onto the Imperial fleet. The silent void between the asteroid belt and the Imperial fleet became a shooting gallery without a single flash of light. There were no glowing plasma bolts. No searing laser beams. The railguns hidden within the asteroid field fired cold. Superconducting coils accelerated solid 3-ton slugs of dense tungsten carbide to 3% of the speed of light, releasing them into the vacuum with zero thermal signature until the kinetic rounds were already halfway to their targets. On the bridge of the Vanguard Prime, the first warning wasn't a sensor ping, it was the sound of a cruiser dying. 300 kilometers to the port side, the heavy cruiser Dominance 3 shuddered violently as 4 kinetic rods struck its forward shield simultaneously. Imperial energy shields were designed to diffuse plasma, absorb radiation, and deflect high-energy particles. They were built for elegant, high-tech warfare. They were not built for 3 tons of hypervelocity metal backed by pure Newtonian physics. The energy shield didn't bend, it shattered like thin glass. The tungsten rods punched straight through the cruiser's nose, tore down the length of its central spine, and blew out through the stern engines, leaving 4 ragged, glowing exit wounds. Pressure seals failed instantly. Within 4 seconds, the Dominance 3 was an unpressurized hull vent burning its atmosphere into the void. Brace for impact. Vael screamed as the radar screen turned into a dense wall of incoming kinetic vectors. Angles on shields. Divert all core output to forward deflection. Tungsten rained down on the lockdown fleet. Ships weren't vaporized. They were dismantled piece by piece. Antennas were snapped off, thermal radiators were shredded, and weapon turrets were sheared clean off their ring mounts by sheer physical momentum. Humanity was killing their high-tech fleet with high-velocity iron. Vael grabbed the communications console, shoving the panic-stricken operator aside. Subspace relay. Broadcast a Priority 0 distress code to Sector Command. We need 3rd Fleet reinforcements. Tell them we are under attack by an unknown human kinetic network. The operator frantically punched the sequence into the quantum entanglement transmitter, trying to force a signal through the void. The console gave a long, high-pitched error tone, and the screen flashed amber. Vael slapped the side of the display. Force the transmission. Override the safety protocols. It's not a safety lock, Sovereign, the operator whispered, looking up with wide, terrified eyes. The gray canisters, they aren't just holding down our warp drives. The gravimetric distortion is tearing apart quantum stability across the entire system. Subspace isn't just jammed, it's shredded. No signal is getting out of this sector. Not to High Command. Not to anyone. The primary power grid on the Vanguard Prime flickered and died, leaving the bridge illuminated only by the dull amber glare of emergency reserve lighting. Outside the viewports, the kinetic rain continued to carve through the Imperial line, methodically stripping 3 centuries of naval dominance down to drifting scrap. Then the static cutting through the bridge speakers shifted. The cold, synthetic tone faded, replaced by the crackle of an old, analog human audio recording. The voice was heavy, raspy, and tired, the voice of an aging human officer speaking into a long-range log drive decades prior. To whoever triggers this directive, the old voice rasped over the dying bridge consoles, you are receiving this because you fired first. We hoped you wouldn't. We truly did. We brought a treaty. We brought open trade routes. We brought peace. Sovereign Vael wiped blue blood from a cut above his primary eyes, staring at the speaker grill as if it were a physical enemy. 80 years ago, the recording continued, the tone dipping into something ancient and dark. The Sol Systems Alliance made its first contact with a species called the Krell. We sent 3 crewed diplomatic vessels to their border world. We wore civilian attire. We extended our hands in friendship. The Krell took our gifts, agreed to the terms, and then turned their orbital batteries on our ships while our delegates were still aboard. They called it tactical efficiency. They called us weak for trusting them. The static hissed, a long, hollow breath carrying across the dead bridge. We buried 300 men and women that year. And on that day humanity made a collective choice. We decided that we would never again risk human lives on the honor of strangers. We decided that every first contact would be a test. Vael's breath hitched. He looked past the glass toward the sleek, matte black hull of the UNS Concorde, floating undisturbed in the heart of the debris field. The ship you just shot at, the voice on the recording said softly, the UNS Concorde, there are no diplomats on board. There never were. Every life sign you scanned, every heartbeat, every thermal signature was a calculated simulation running on a closed-loop processor. You didn't kill a diplomatic team, Sovereign. You answered a survey. The realization hung in the pitch-black air of the command deck like a physical weight. The diplomats were ghosts. The peace offer was a decoy. The entire engagement had been an automated test of character, and the Dominion had failed in the first 5 seconds. Panic surged through the remaining officers like wildfire. Damage reports didn't ping through electronic consoles anymore. They were shrieked across the dark bridge by officers using handheld emergency comms. Cruiser Vindicator has lost primary core containment. Reactor scrammed. Battleship Iron Monarch reporting total steering failure. Their reaction thrusters were sheared off by kinetic rain. They are tumbling into the gas giant's gravity well. Sovereign. Secondary power on the Vanguard Prime is dying. Thermal radiators are breached. The core is heat-locking. Vael couldn't speak. He watched the fleet tactical display dissolve into a sea of gray, inactive icons. The humans weren't annihilating them. That was the most terrifying part. A full kinetic barrage from those converted freighters could have cracked every Imperial hull end-to-end, turning 20,000 crew members into frozen drift. Instead, the targeting was impossibly, unnervingly precise. Slugs stripped weapon arrays. Slugs took out main thruster assemblies. Slugs punched surgical holes through cooling lines, forcing safety AI after safety AI to trigger emergency reactor shutdowns to prevent localized meltdowns. They weren't destroying the fleet. They were neutering it. Stripping away 3 centuries of star-spanning military supremacy and leaving 1,000-meter warships drifting in the dark, helpless, unpowered, and cold. The continuous stream of technical telemetry from the automated system finally faded. The raspy voice from the historical log cut off with a quiet, static pop. For 3 long seconds, the only sound across the Vanguard Prime was the frantic, raspy breathing of its surviving bridge crew and the metallic groan of an unpowered hull cooling down in deep vacuum. Then the main broadcast array hummed to life once more. This time there was no synthetic filter. No monophonic cadence. No pre-recorded log from 80 years ago. It was a live human voice. Come. Gravelly. Carrying the unmistakable, relaxed authority of a commander sitting in a hardened bunker somewhere deep behind the line. Dominion Vanguard, the voice said, quiet and dangerously steady. This is Strike Commander Vance, Sol Systems 9th Fleet. I assume you finished shooting at our empty ship. Silence stretched across the crippled bridge of the Vanguard Prime, heavy and suffused with the scent of ozone and scorched copper. Sovereign Vael pulled himself up against the edge of the tactical console, his claws leaving shallow gouges in the display glass. Human, Vael rasped into the comms pickup, forcing cold Imperial fury through a throat raw with smoke. You think this trickery makes you our superiors? You hide behind automated buoys and cowardly tricks. You lure an Imperial fleet into a trap under the banner of peace. Across the void, Commander Vance let out a low, dry chuckle that held zero warmth. It wasn't a trap, Sovereign, Vance said, his voice echoing cleanly through the static. A trap implies we wanted to fight you today. We didn't. That treaty on the Concord? It was genuine. The trade routes, the border allocations, the shared sensor access. Every word of it was ratified by the Alliance Senate. We gave you every opportunity to take the open hand. Vael sneered, gesturing blindly to his ruined bridge officers. You brought a target sweep disguised as a delegation. You mapped our fleet down to our thermal manifolds. We mapped your fleet because we aren't fools, Vance replied, his tone shifting from casual to razor-sharp steel. Humanity learned a long time ago that peace without teeth isn't peace, it's just waiting to be slaughtered. So we live by a very simple rule out here in the dark. We bring open hands but we anchor them in iron. You had a choice. You could have verified our credentials, signed the parchment, and shared the sector. Instead, you saw what you thought was a weak target and pulled the trigger. Vance paused, the soft hum of the long-range transmitter carrying over the channel. You showed us who you are, Sovereign. Directive Double-Zero just answered in kind. Vael's teeth bared in a snarl. Imperial doctrine did not permit surrender to a species that relied on kinetic slugs and converted cargo barges. To yield here, to drift helpless while primitives dictated terms, was a death worse than execution by the Sovereign Council. He looked up at the main view screen. The skeleton frame of the human command node, the stripped escort ship, hung 300 kilometers out. It was vulnerable, fragile, and holding together the entire gravimetric and kinetic net. Vael bypassed the main fire control locks with his master override key. Auxiliary thrusters. Vael roared, his voice cracking with desperate fanaticism. Route all remaining emergency battery power into the starboard maneuvering jets. Lock our bow directly onto that command node. His navigation officer looked up, eyes wide with horror. Sovereign, our main engines are dead. If we burn emergency reserves for a kinetic ramming vector, we will have no power left for life support. Execute the order. Vael screamed, slamming his fist onto the console. If this fleet is to burn, we will tear their brain from the sky with our own hands. Full forward thrust. Ramming speed. On the view screen, the massive, dead hull of the Vanguard Prime began to turn, its auxiliary chemical jets spewing desperate fire into the dark, lining up a suicide run straight into the heart of the human array. The massive, blackened hull of the Vanguard Prime groaned as its emergency maneuvering jets fired in violent, uncontrolled bursts. 10 million tons of Imperial military steel slowly rolled on its axis, aligning its armored prow directly with the frail, skeleton frame of the human command node. Sovereign Vael stood at the forward viewports, teeth bared, watching the distance count down on his emergency HUD. 200 kilometers. 150. Without primary shields or functioning weapon systems, the dreadnought itself was the final weapon, a dying leviathan set on a suicide course to crush the human array into cosmic dust. Over the open comms channel, Strike Commander Vance didn't sound surprised. He didn't order a defensive volley. He didn't even raise his voice. Predictable, Vance said softly. You just don't know how to stop fighting, do you? On the human escort ship, the central C4I core didn't charge railguns. Instead, four heavy capacitor banks mounted along its central spine discharged simultaneously. A localized, directional high-frequency magnetic pulse tore through the gap between the two ships in a fraction of a second. It wasn't an explosive blast. It was an invisible wall of pure electromagnetic force. The pulse hit the Vanguard Prime head-on. The sudden, violent magnetic torque caught the dreadnought's maneuvering thrusters mid-burn, shearing the steering nozzles clean off their mountings in a spray of sparks and twisted metal. The remaining chemical fuel ignited in open space, blowing out the ship's entire forward maneuvering array in a silent, blinding flash. The flagship didn't crash into the human node. Stripped of its steering surfaces and vector control, the massive vessel drifted uselessly past the escort ship, tumbling on a lazy, uncontrollable axis out toward the inner system. The bridge of the Vanguard Prime went dead silent. The last amber emergency lights flickered out, leaving only the harsh, cold light of the system's star creeping through the forward viewports. Vael slumped against the dead console, his claws slipping off the ruined metal. They were adrift, unpowered, weaponless, and falling slowly into the gravitational well of the local sun. Commander Vance's voice cut back through the static, crisp and cold. "I've routed a low-draw wireless feed to hold your bridge life support online," Vance announced. "It will keep your air scrubbers running for 48 hours. Exactly long enough for one emergency escape pod to launch from your stern bays." Vael lifted his head, his vision blurring as cold air filled the cabin. You offer mercy?" "We're not offering mercy, Sovereign," Vance replied, his words laced with unforgiving gravel. "We're giving you a job. One pod. One survivor. You get to carry the flight recorder back to your Imperial High Command. Tell them what happened here. Tell them what happens when the Dominion tries to shoot its way through a human treaty." The single escape pod ejected from the stern of the Vanguard Prime with a low pneumatic hiss, falling clear of the dead dreadnought's shadow. Inside the cramped cabin, Sovereign Vael sat wrapped in emergency thermal foil, surrounded by the cold blue light of automated consoles burning through the flagship's core data dump. Outside the narrow viewport, the battle space was already returning to silence. The converted human freighters back in the asteroid belt had spun down to microwatt standby, slipping back into the shadow of frozen rock as if they had never moved at all. The tungsten grav anchors remained in place, holding their silent, iron grip on local geometry to ensure no Imperial rescue fleet could jump in blind. The pod's specialized transmitter hummed, using the tight beam clearance channel Commander Vance had left open. The data transfer began, terabytes of compressed telemetry, thermal sweeps, shield collapse diagnostics, and raw audio streaming out toward the nearest Imperial border station. Back at High Command, the Grand Marshal would examine those feeds and see a total paradigm shift. They would see an Empire's premier Vanguard division erased from the galactic board in under 20 minutes, without a single human casualty logged on the sensors. No grand star bases destroyed. No glorious fleet engagements. Just cold, calculating efficiency hypervelocity iron, and a species that refused to yield an inch of space. As the pod's low-yield sublight engines nudged it clear of the gravwell, the cabin's comms display flashed with a final broad-spectrum transmission, an open archival log broadcast across deep space channels, cataloging the encounter for any captain navigating the dark edges of the galaxy. If you are receiving this broadcast, your vessel is currently moving through monitored Sol system space. Remember the lesson of Vanguard Division 1. When humanity extends an open hand, do not mistake their patience for vulnerability. They write their treaties in good faith, but they anchor every word in iron. To continue monitoring these tactical archives, track the operational boundary of the Alliance, and stay prepared for the harsh realities of the Outer Rim, keep your receivers locked to this operational frequency. Signal your clearance with a like on this broadcast, subscribe to the comms network for the next tactical report, and help ensure humanity's story is heard across every star system. Because out here on the cold frontier, the galaxy does not forgive a second mistake. 3 hours after the lone Imperial escape pod cleared the gravimetric net, the cold-worked tungsten anchors discharged their localized fields, letting the warped geometry of the system smooth back out into natural space. Subspace ripples tore across the dark as a dozen heavy Alliance reclamation vessels dropped into high orbit around the gas giant, escorted by 2 Ninth Fleet heavy frigates. Their hulls were not pristine or decorative. They were scarred by atmospheric reentries and industrial wear built for work, survival, and hard logistics. High-yield magnetic grapple lines snared the dead, drifting husks of the Imperial Vanguard fleet. Systems that had taken the Dominion 3 centuries to design and refine were now nothing more than raw salvage, waiting to be towed back to orbital yards, dismantled down to the last circuit board, and studied by human engineers. Every shield harmonic, every reactor design, and every piece of alien tactical software would be integrated into the Alliance defense grid within the year. In the center of the debris field, the sleek, matte black hull of the UNS Concorde flickered. Its automated systems rebooted, shedding the energy-absorbent composite shield and returning the vessel to its polished, non-reflective white paint. Its chemical thrusters fired in short, controlled bursts, bringing the diplomatic shuttle back onto its original vector. The galaxy had long believed that humanity was an upstart, fragile species, begging for recognition at the council tables of ancient empires. They thought human diplomacy was born of desperation, a plea for survival from a race that knew it was outmatched. They knew better now. Across the frontier, Word of the encounter around the gas giant spread through high command bunkers and Imperial courtrooms like a quiet poison. The lesson of Directive Double-Zero was clear. Humanity did not ask for permission to exist among the stars, nor would they beg for peace from those who ruled by force. They would extend the hand of fellowship to anyone willing to take it. But behind every smile, behind every treaty, and behind every unarmed diplomatic ship, lay thousands of tons of hypervelocity tungsten waiting in the dark. Space remained cold, silent, and endless. But for the Sol Systems Alliance, the frontier had never felt safer.